narrative, though, around the Samaritan woman. And I also know that you've been telling everyone you're 29 for the last 8 years. You're getting it, but a little slow. So Susan and I attended the Global Leadership Summit this past Thursday and Friday in the ever-global city of Ahwatukee. And Pastor Susan and I both have difficulty still pronouncing that, even though I've lived here for 4 years. She speaks Zulu and I speak a little Russian. But Ahwatukee is still challenging. So aside from having an incredibly great experience and very inspirational speakers, for me, the Leadership Summit really affirmed my leadership style, which has been developing over the last 30 years in a variety of different settings. And when I doubt my leadership skills, which I frequently do, and when I doubt my intuitions, looking back on these last 2 days will help me to be a bolder, more authentic leader. And what was interesting about the whole Leadership Summit was that individuals and people today are looking to follow authentic, vulnerable leaders who are able to admit their stuff. They're looking for leaders who boldly live into an unknown future, fully aware that they're going to make mistakes and they're going to need redos. I wish our government could hear that. The summit was produced, though, by Willow Creek Church, a megachurch in Chicago. Pastor Susan and I probably have quite a few theological differences with this megachurch. They have 450,000 in attendance at these summits. They have about 135 countries involved and 60 languages. And the church itself in Chicago worships approximately 26,000 in Barrington Hills, Illinois, and they have 7 satellite locations. Now, the question I have, is this too big to fail? Kind of like our banks. What you may not be aware of is the night before, there was some breaking news about allegations against the senior minister and pastor of Willow Creek that hosts this incredible leadership summit, Bill Hybels. Now, it's kind of been an ongoing situation, but the news came out in force. He was accused, there were allegations of sexual misconduct against him as the founding pastor. Then 2 lead pastors announced that they would be resigning. The church elder board also announced that they were resigning. And I know they're so much prettier than Susan and I. Well, maybe not than Susan. But that's kind of their leadership team. And the church is a bit in a state of panic and frustration and anger and questions and fear. And I'm going to quote my Auntie Annabelle because it's the right time. She says, "Jimmy, honey child, humans is just messy." Last week I acknowledged church has made a mess of things culturally. From my own experience, my first call to not a mega church, but a United Church of Christ in Minnesota, Spirit of the Lakes United Church of Christ, had 3 clergy in a row that were removed because of sexual allegations and impropriety, which were indeed confirmed. And so I come in as the 4th pastor with 2 people, and very, very frustrating and challenging. And I had to have incredibly tight boundaries. At one point, they used to worship about 500 people, and at this point, it was less than a handful. But something I've learned in life that we all need to learn not only from our successes, but we also need to learn from our what? Our failures, our challenges, those times when things don't go as planned. This doesn't excuse the accusations, but this is the world that we're living in. Thank God, I say, for the Me Too movement that gives a voice to the systemic gender inequality in our culture. And this is something I believed for many, many, many years. Justice is the handmaiden of truth, and when truth dies, justice is buried with it. Thank you, Maddie, for reading the scripture for us. I think this is what it has to say in short. The woman at the well was seeking truth, and Jesus was offering justice. How does that summit apply in every which way? How does this woman's story apply to us today in every way possible? In this narrative, we find Jesus and this woman at the local community watering hole. In my lifetime, I have been this woman at a watering hole in my own way. In my younger years, in my coming out years when I was 18, 19, and 20, I hung around the watering holes in Chicago, which happened to be gay bars. I was attempting to find myself in a very similar fashion to the woman at the well, trying to live into my truth, trying to unravel who I was and who I was to become. I visited many of those stand and pose gay bars on Halsted Street in Chicago, but to be honest, they never became my watering holes. Middle Eastern village women avoid the heat of the day by carrying water the first thing in the morning. And for reasons of safety and propriety, they usually would come as a group. But this woman in the story is alone, and she is in the middle of the day, we are told. She's either a social outcast or she's up to something. That she could be up to something is indicated by the fact that at ancient Middle Eastern wells, like single bars, that's where men went to make initial contact with women, or in contemporary terms, to hook up. Older Testament and Hebrew figures like Jacob and Rachel, where did they meet? At a well. Moses and Zipporah, they met at a well. Maybe that was her game. Maybe it was that she couldn't stand the dirty looks and the whispers, as Maddie read for us, from the women who had not been through 5 divorces. Either way, she's right to be puzzled when Jesus speaks to her. Now, what Jesus should have done when he saw her coming was to withdraw at a distance of at least 20 feet. That was the requirement in Jewish Hebrew culture. 20 feet of distance. Instead, he speaks to her directly. That is a scandal. Dr. Ken Bailey, a New Testament scholar and friend of mine who has lived in the Middle East for 40 years, he told me that there were 4 cultural taboos that Jesus involves himself with in this reading. First, he's talking to this woman in public. His disciples had gone into town to get some lunch. And he asked the woman, he says, just simply give me water. My friend Ken said that he never once crossed that social boundary in the Middle East when he was living there for 40 years. And he never saw it crossed. Men don't generally make eye contact with women that they don't know in public in many Middle Eastern cultures, especially in Jesus' day. And a rabbi, we are told in Jesus' day, would not even speak to his wife in public. But Jesus was a cultural and religious boundary breaker. He talked to this woman and he talked to many others, and he invited many women to be a part of his band of followers. They traveled with him. They financed Jesus' ministry. Apparently, Jesus didn't have a lot of use for the cultural taboos of his day concerning women. Now, second, Jesus ignores this century-old conflict between Samaritans and Jews. Samaritans and Jews, they literally hated one another. And if you can't make personal applications today, think about it. Well, without going into too much detail, it was really a matter of the North and the South. I think the Mason-Dixon line. It was the northern kingdom, Samaritans, and the southern kingdom of Jews. A divided people, years of occupation, years of a lack of civil dialogue, years of power plays, different capitals, different centers of power, and yet they had the same ancestral God. The Samaritans, they intermarried with non-Jews. You need to keep your race pure. We've heard that narrative. And their holy places, Samaritans worshipped Yahweh on Mount Gerizim, but the Jews worshipped in Jerusalem. So the bottom line is that Jews rejected Samaritans, Samaritans rejected Jews. Jews called Samaritans half-breeds, and they said their worship was not legitimate, that it was illegitimate worship. So they became bitter enemies. What have you got left? I love this quote from one of our ex-presidents. Whether the borders that divide us are picket fences or national boundaries, we are all neighbors in a global community. The third cultural religious taboo was Jesus actually approaches this woman with humility. Humility. You see, they didn't have community buckets at the wells. The disciples obviously left with their bucket, but couldn't Jesus just miraculously make a bucket appear? I mean, this is Jesus after all, right? He made all sorts of things disappear and appear. But Jesus says, in humility, give me a drink, which puts her at his mercy. That was an act of humility. Thomas Merton says, pride makes us artificial and humility makes us real. Jesus was anything but artificial. Jesus was humble, he was real, he was honest, and he was authentic. I have noted throughout my life this harsh and yet liberating truth: humble yourself or life will do it for you. Humble yourself or life will do it for you. So as I take a drink of water, Jesus, fourth, and I think this is a critical one, Jesus asked for a drink out of her bucket. Jews and Samaritans did not share dishes. Even to this day, they don't share dishes if you're in the more conservative Orthodox camp. In essence, Jesus was saying, I will touch what you touch, not only with my hands, but potentially with my lips. I don't care that you're a woman. I don't care that you're a Samaritan. I will take the posture of humility. Rituals, bah humbug, Jesus says, because you are a fellow human being, woman of Samaria. And let's just act like we're humans together. I think Jesus pokes a little fun at her at this point. Like, where's your bucket, mister? And Jesus responds in the most profound, amazing way. And he says, how about I give you this? I can give you a spring of living water, and you'll never be thirsty again. Isn't that what we all want in life? In the middle of this desert, not only this physical desert, but the spiritual desert of life itself, do we not want the kind of water that brings life, that makes things grow, that makes us grow and expand? A spring of refreshing, living water? And Jesus hits this woman right at the very core of what she needs. You know, woman, I'm afraid you've been looking for love in a lot of different places. Something to bring satisfaction in men, in relationships, in marriage or not. You've had 5 husbands and you're moving toward your 6th. Relationship addiction, as our good friend Tom Cruise would say. She was looking for somebody to complete her. Somebody to make her feel fulfilled. Somebody to make her feel loved. And I wondered if in her mind she was thinking, maybe this is the man. So Jesus puts his finger right on her greatest pain in life. He sees right to her heart. He looks deep within and he sees what's really killing her. God gets to this rejected woman's greatest need because that's how God's Spirit works in even our world. God's Spirit gets to our greatest need, if indeed we allow it to happen. And it's not usually until we get to our 6th or 7th or 8th relationship or marriage. It's usually when we get to the end of our own abilities and sensibilities that we start to be able to see and admit what is really happening in our lives. Jesus cuts through all the niceties, all the rituals, all the polite conversation, and meets her at her greatest need. This is an incredibly, incredibly deep act of compassion. And he puts his finger right where it hurts. This has been one of my deepest truths. Not you complete me, but the next one. God's power is unleashed in the midst of our deepest weaknesses. We are so afraid of our failures and our weaknesses and our pain, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And I think what is incredibly interesting, because Jesus starts to hit a little too close to home here, and she begins to change the subject. She changes the subject on Jesus, nonetheless. I don't think you can really change subjects on Jesus. And when I want to avoid a particularly difficult situation or a difficult conversation, I use humor to change the subject. Or I turn it into, another question. It's always a great tactic. What's ironic is that she actually asks the right question, or at least Jesus gives the right answer. So where should I worship Jesus? What God should I worship, Jesus? And Jesus, what is worship? She's saying, where can I get free? Where can I allow and have my chains loosened? Religion has oppressed me. My culture has oppressed me. My family has oppressed me. The other women that I thought were in my intimate circle, they've oppressed me. Heck, my entire little town has oppressed me. Where am I going to get the feeling that I am forgiven and loved? That, my dear, is what I came to bring. Jesus says, where does forgiveness come from? It's not going to come from Mount Zion or Mount Gerizim, or it's not going to come from where you worship. Jesus says both of these, they're obsolete answers because they're too small, because that puts the real God in a box. Behind the curtain in a temple where nobody gets to see this except Jewish elite men who go back there at least once a year to see the Holy of Holies. And what God is really after is true worshipers. Race, gender, your nation, the kind of music, the kind of building you have, the kind of temple you have, the kind of mosque you have, none of that really matters. And Jesus goes on to teach her and say, worship isn't about geography or pedigree. It's about engaging your whole body, your mind, your soul, your spirit with the Spirit of God. And this can happen anytime and anywhere because your body is a vehicle of worship. Now, isn't that a train wreck waiting to happen? He says to this woman who is unloved by the majority of her culture, the majority of those other religious folk who say that her body is what? Sinful and evil and unloved and corrupt. Your body, woman, is where God dwells. Your body is the vehicle of worship. This woman was so touched by the message of inclusion from Jesus, she completely forgot what she went to the well for. She leaves her pot and she runs back, or she sprints back to town, and she tells the whole town about it, and she shouts, I think, she says, "Come and see this man who knew all about me. He knew me inside and out." She just wanted somebody to know her. Obviously, her 5 husbands knew her, but they didn't know her. They didn't know her. She wanted someone to really know her. Not just sexually, but intimately, emotionally, spiritually. Isn't that what we all want? We all want to be known by God, and we want to be known by at least one other person. We all want to be seen. We all want somebody to go to the heart of the matter. We all want a safe, secure place to be me. You want a secure and safe place to be you. And we all want to just be. So today I encourage you, I don't have a big aha moment. I'm hoping you can find your meaning in the message today. I would say today, you can just leave your jars behind. Leave your past behind. Leave yesterday behind. Leave 2 years ago behind. Leave all those many relationships behind, or not. Leave the containers of shame. Leave the container of fear, because those do not serve any of us well in this life. This woman was transformed, and in fact, I think what is amazing is her entire community was transformed. So in the end, what is going to transform us and the people sitting around you is not the right heritage, not the right gender or gender expression, not worshiping in the right or the wrong place, not having the right preacher. It's about having the right answers, not to theological questions. What will transform you is the experience of the divine. What will transform you is leaving jars behind and experiencing in that moment the presence of the divine. I would like you to just sit for a moment in silence, and then we're going to hear a song, Blackbird, which we can join in, but I'd encourage you to stay seated. It is, yes, a Beatles song. I think the Beatles were prophets in their own way. It's from their album known as the White Album. The song was written by McCartney, although it was crafted by Lennon. And the lyrics were inspired by hearing the call of the blackbird in India, and by hearing the unfortunate state of race relations in the United States in the 1960s. This woman, there's some unfortunate race relations happening in her life, right? And there's an awful lot of unfortunate race relations happening right now in our country. But it's hearing the call of that blackbird and hearing the call of spirit, the white or red, or whatever color the spirit dove is to you. But it's hearing that call within and leaving our jugs and leaving our water buckets and leaving our stuff behind and moving on and moving forward. So let us be in a moment of prayer. Oh, good and loving God, we so love these mysterious stories and these mysterious interactions between you and women and blind men. We love to hear interaction between the divine and the human. Teach us, O God, what it means to be our full, authentic selves. Teach us to come to you and to be ready to allow you to transform us, to leave our water jugs at that well of life and to be filled with a different kind of spirit, with a different kind of living water. We all want to be known. We all want to be seen. We all want to be known at our very inner core. Allow that to happen during the course of this week. Allow that to happen even in this space among us. Bless us so that we can go forth to be a blessing to others. And the people of God said, Amen.